Hi, it's Dr. DeBord, and I'm here today to talk about Chapter 2, the material on research. Let's see. So today, for this first short video, I'm going to talk about different kinds of research and some important terms for the research process, and then we'll get through probably correlation. The next video will be mainly about doing the experiment and ethics involved in research. So the first area I want to touch upon is about the scientific method and why we use it. We need a systematic way of looking at things so that we can have evidence for what we're talking about. If you look at the intro psych book that I'm asking you to read for this semester, it's not just a bunch of somebody's good ideas. They're sitting around like me at home in front of the computer saying, I think this is a good idea. Instead, people come up with like what I'm sure you've heard of are hypotheses, or hypothesis I have down here on the screen. And that is basically this educated guess or this prediction about how things would be related. But then if they make a prediction like two things are related, they need to go out and collect evidence to see if in fact they are. The textbook I'm asking you to read for this semester is backed up by a lot of evidence. And so psychology is just like any of the other hard sciences like physics or chemistry or biology, except we're doing research on human beings, which is a little messier sometimes because human beings seem sometimes to be a little bit less predictable than what would happen if you mix two chemicals together. So a hypothesis is a prediction, educated guess about how two things are related. And then another term here that I want you to know on this first slide is what an operational definition is. An operational definition is you are like naming a construct, or you are naming a variable. You're naming the thing you want to examine and look at. You're naming it in terms of how you're measuring it. This is very important. I know for some of the research I did myself several years ago, I was looking at alcohol use in college students and realized with some of the people I was working with that if we just ask people, okay, how many drinks do you typically have like on a Friday night? We would get answers that were all over the place, because just saying a drink for some people meant that yeah, they could load up like, a huge glass like this up to here with Jack and then put a little bit of Coke on it, and then that's one drink. That's not the case. We had to operation define our terms and tell people, look, a drink is 12 ounces of beer, or it's 4 ounces of wine, or 1 ounce of hard liquor. And then when we asked them how many drinks they had, they go, oh yeah. So then we got more consistent answers that way. And then other people could replicate or redo our research because we had named the variables we were interested in terms of how we measured them. And that's what an operational definition is. Also, just the idea of a theory is kind of a grand story about how things are related. And then you can, from that theory, you have individual predictions about this thing is related to that thing and this thing's related to that thing. So you need kind of an overall theory about, at least for psychology, how people tick, how people operate. We have theories about why people get depressed, and we'll get to that in the chapter on disorders. Okay, there are several ways to do research. Here is a list. I'm going to talk about, like I said, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5, 6 of them today, and then the last one, and ethics on our next video. So one approach to research is to do a case study. And a case study is an individual instance, one situation, one person. And we do a case study because that instance is kind of rare. I couldn't go do survey. Like I don't know if you've ever seen Frankie and Alice, but it's a movie that Halle Berry stars in about multiple personality disorder. Multiple personality disorder is not very common. So I can't go out there and collect survey data on people with personality disorder, with multiple personalities, because there just aren't that many people who have it. So we can do a case study, and that's an in-depth look at one situation, and that can generate ideas about what things might be involved with this situation. But we cannot generalize from that one case to other people. because it is just one situation. You could also say that if we wanted to do a study on Lincoln University would be a case. And we could examine, okay, how did Lincoln University respond to the coronavirus? And what did that do in terms of student outcomes and also the health of the institution? And you could do an individual study just on that. And then from that, we could generate ideas about, oh, this is what happened at Lincoln. Maybe this, I mean, if we then look at more systematically other universities, we could look out for these things. So case studies generate questions for us, but not conclusions that we can generalize. I also have in there, obviously, conjoint twins. That's a rare thing as well. Let's see. Another way of doing research is naturalistic observation. Naturalistic observation is basically being able to typically have cameras or some way of recording people's behaviors without intervening with them. So I had there a picture of kids in the playground, with parents' permission. If researchers wanted to look at how do, actually, I think you could do a study on if kids on the playground have more fights and arguments before or after lunch. If they do that, they could just basically have the cameras out on the playground during recess before lunch and during recess after lunch, and just record like how many aggressive acts are there. But then you have to operationally define aggressive acts, and that's important. You want to be clear that when you have that recorded, and then you take those recordings to someone else to have them count the number of aggressive acts, you've operationally defined what an aggressive act is. Is it a punch? Is it a hit? Is it a kick? Does it include verbal things, saying name calling, things like that? You have to be absolutely clear what you're talking about. But naturalistic observation is going to record people in their natural setting. One video that I will probably show in person, if given the opportunity, is a video I had on one researcher who was interested on when people laugh. And what he found in just listening to conversations of people nearby is that people didn't laugh at jokes. They laughed basically as a way to communicate to the people who were with them, you were part of my group. So it was kind of a social cue that I'm accepting you. And you can imagine what that would be like if you walked up to a group where they're all laughing, they all stopped laughing when you showed up. And you wonder if they're talking about you, but it's also a message. It's like, are you included in this group? So it's weird that from this naturalistic observation, we found that, wow, most laughter is not in response to something that's really funny. Few other ways to do research. Surveys are one of the most common. You probably filled out surveys online before, I'm guessing. The problem with surveys is that how they're worded can influence the kind of results you get back. So if you say, do you support social welfare programs from the government? And if you ask it that way, you're going to get a lot of people who say no. If you ask people instead, do you support helping provide food to children who are hungry? People go, oh yeah, definitely. And that's just, the same thing. It's just worded differently. So you have to be careful and thoughtful about the kind of the wording you put in surveys when you're asking people questions. Also, people lie. When you do survey research on sexual behavior and drug behavior, people are often not honest about their responses. So you have to take that into consideration too. Archival research is another form of research. Those are any old records that you could go into. So we could go into, again, looking at Lincoln University, we could go into the success rates of our student graduates. And we could say, okay, we want to go back and look to see the years on campus when we had tutoring programs and the years we didn't. And then see if that affected the number of students who either graduated or successfully completed a semester. But we could do that all by looking at old records from the records office and from all the records that they keep in Young Hall about what happens on campus. So that's archival research, going to the archives, the old records. Also, one of the things that studies are divided into longitudinal and cross-sectional research. Longitudinal is looking at things over time, asking the same people the same questions over time to see growth or change over time. But a cross-sectional study is just a snapshot, just like a one single time you're trying to figure out how things are related. Okay, with the time remaining, I'm just going to briefly touch on correlation. A correlation is an association. So, and we have basically three major types. We have a positive correlation, a negative correlation, and a zero correlation. Now, one thing, when you say things are correlated, that does not mean that one thing causes the other. Like, for instance, one of the things that I know is that like the more I teach, like when I come back to school in the fall, the more I have to go pee in the bathroom. And it's like, does teaching cause me to pee? No, but they're correlated. The more I teach, the more I have to go to the bathroom and pee. So if you look at that, it's like, well, those things are related, but why? Basically, it's because when I'm teaching, I get dry mouth and I have to drink water all the time. So when I'm in the classroom, I always have a big bottle of water that I'm drinking from. So because I'm doing, there's a third variable, a third factor that relates to both of those, teaching and having to go to the bathroom. I put up here an ice cream cone, and that is like, we know that the more ice cream that is sold, the more fights there are. And so the question are, does ice cream cause fights? No, basically it's another factor that's related to both of those, and that's warm weather. The warmer it is, the more people buy ice cream, and also the more people are outside. The more people are outside, the more they are likely to run into one another and have interactions that can go, badly. So we have the direction and strength of a relationship. So this one is a positive correlation. This is indicating that basically you can see on this graph, as stress goes up, a person's depression score goes up too. And so a positive correlation basically says as one variable goes up, the other variable also goes up, but they move together because as one variable goes down, the other variable also goes down. So a positive correlation is just saying things move together in time. So as one goes up, the other goes up. As one goes down, the other goes down. That is a positive correlation. And so we know that if a person's stress levels are really high, the odds that they're going to have symptoms of depression are also really high. If their stress levels are really low, the odds that they're going to be depressed are also pretty low. That is a positive correlation. A negative correlation can be a little more difficult. That is, as one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. So here I have activity levels. So that's like exercise. So we know, actually it's powerful correlation, that the more a person exercises, the less likely they are to be depressed. They're related. There's not 100%. We can't say one causes the other, but we know those things are associated. But as you can see, as exercise and activity goes up, then you're going to see depression scores go down. And if a person has no activity at all, then you're going to see that the likelihood that they're going to be depressed is higher. Now, a zero correlation means things are not related at all. So here we have intelligence scores, like IQ scores, and also how depressed a person is. We know that it doesn't matter at all if a person's really bright or if they're not very bright, that you have people depressed in all levels of intelligence. And so you can see here, you have a person's name next to each one of these dots, and that's the way correlations work. You collect data on both of these variables, and then you plot them on a graph like this. And you can see here, actually one of the things I wanted to mention, a correlation coefficient is basically, if you go back to this one here, do you see that if you go over, like on the stress levels, if you go over 1 or 2, the line goes up 1 or 2? If you remember from like high school geometry, that rise over run, or the slope of the line, that is your correlation coefficient. And when it's a positive like this, you're going to see a positive number. When it's looking like this, you're going to see a negative number. When you see this, that slope, that line has a zero slope. And that means the two things are not related at all. So that is the major set of correlations. And I will leave that at that. We will pick up next time on the experiment. Thanks.